It's going to go down as the biggest political blunder in U.S. history, repealing this ban. I'm going to show you some stuff today that I'm almost positive 99% of you haven't seen before. Because these snippets of video that I'm going to show you go back to 2015, when the discussion was being had about whether we should lift the ban or not. The big discussions were, oh my goodness, we have all of this excess production. We need to start allowing oil companies to export oil. No one thinking it through. And it is going to screw America so bad. Now, here's the question that many people do not get. Because every time they hear, oh boy, we found more in the Permian. Oh no, we found more in the tar sands. Oh wow, look at all of this. They do not understand the difference between oil production and oil exporting. See, when they hear the U.S. is producing all of this oil, there is this assumption that automatically kicks in people's heads that it goes to the U.S. first, and it doesn't. The United States doesn't own any oil. There are oil companies here that do, and yes, we do have a strategic reserve. But U.S. energy independence and free market capitalism are diametrically opposed, because the former presumes that U.S. oil companies have the impetus to provide U.S. oil needs first before exporting it anywhere. And there is no mechanism for that since 2014. It's gone, and you mark my words, this is part of the reason things are going the way they are down in South America. Because they realize this. There was this book written that I have really hesitated to talk about, because it makes an assumption that doesn't really jive with reality, but it was right about one thing. Big oil and the attack on the United States. Because there's, once again, I'll say it again, there is this assumption that Americans have, that they believe that when oil gets pumped out of the ground in the United States, that it is automatically destined for the United States first. And it's not. Now this is Gas Buddy. This isn't a political tool here at all. And this shows, right here where my cursor is, 2014. This is where the U.S. and Saudi Arabia artificially cratered the price of oil, when every other member of OPEC wanted to cut production to firm up prices. And you can read that. I have it on Investopedia. I'll give you the link. The U.S. and Saudi Arabia, and then Saudi Arabia's buddies, all decided to put the foot on the accelerator, and they glutted the market. The largest amount of crude in reserve in 85 years was not an accident. It had nothing to do with OPEC. It only had anything to do with OPEC in the sense that the U.S. used its proxy seat with Iraq to get that job done. Then, once oil prices hit historic lows, then that's when they said, oh no, we have all these extra, we need to allow ourselves to export. And what I'm going to show you in these videos is that at the time, the belief was the Iran sanctions were going to be lifted, meaning there would be more oil on the market and there wouldn't be this shortage like we're seeing now because of Venezuela and because of Iran. It was a setup. Now, here we go with the snippets. Sorry. Just a lot on my mind today. All right. This is a 36-second from Charles K. Ebinger, Senior Fellow Director, Energy Security Initiative.
Is that with the unconventional oil production that we have in areas such as North Dakota and elsewhere in the country, as well as large volumes of crude coming in from Canada, we will soon face a fact that we have a surplus on the U.S. Gulf Coast, which will lead to falling petroleum prices, which on the one hand may sound good for American consumers, but if prices fell to the level that threatened this new unconventional oil and gas production, we could see large investments shut in, and that would be very deleterious to our long-term energy security.
Okay, that's big oil making their case.
Oil exports, unions, leading newspapers like the Detroit News, Washington Post, and Boston Globe. Why lift the ban? The Washington Post says it's a simple policy that would spur economic growth and lower gas prices. Lifting the ban would increase domestic production and could push gas prices down. It's an easy win for jobs. Tell Congress, lift the ban on crude oil exports and consumers win.
All right, once again, big oil pushing for this. These video snippets, I'll give you the links to. They're back from 2014 and 2015. Now, here's the one. This is a little bit longer. I'm going to speed it up so that you guys don't have to waste a whole bunch of time. Grand total, the snippet's 3 minutes 54 seconds. At 1.5, it'll take 2 minutes of your life. But listen to this from September 16th, 2015.
Why would the president be opposed to lifting the ban of exporting oil? I mean, shouldn't we be able to sell our goods to whomever we like?
Well, if we could have had some Lady Gaga poker face music coming into the segment, I think it would have been appropriate. I think what's going on is the president is really trying to set the stage for some kind of deal on crude exports. His previous unofficial position, I guess, from the White House was that he wasn't opposed to crude exports like the Keystone Pipeline, which he, of course, has vetoed and would veto if it was attached to some kind of must-sign legislation. Instead, their view has been if it can get through Congress, he would be for it or he'd sign it. But I think their view, that was a couple months ago, I think their view was that it probably could never get through Congress. So now they're faced with the prospects of, bills being voted on the House floor at the end of the month and in the Senate sometime later this fall as well.
What's the issue here for real? I mean, are people concerned that exporting our crude would then somehow drive up prices for American citizens at the pump because we'd have to pay more to import crude from, well, pretty soon Iran and other countries?
Well, really, the rationale against it, or at least moving more cautiously, even among Republicans in Congress earlier this year, was any kind of potential impacts of gasoline prices. But, we've had about a dozen independent studies, including one from EIA about a week ago, which said there'd be very little impact, if anything, and it could perhaps lower gasoline prices. And now, of course, we've got, gasoline prices heading below $2 a gallon. So I think concern about gas prices is not really it. What really changed the political calculus in Washington is the Iran deal. And it basically, in a few weeks, or a few months, I guess sanctions will get lifted on Iran, which means crude oil exports from Iran will be allowed to continue, and probably we'll see, about 752 million barrels extra in the short term. But yet the U.S. ban remains in place. I think that's a politically indefensible position. It's what really moved Congress to be more aggressive in pushing it. And of course, the Iran deal is something that this administration and president is championing. So I think for the same reasons it's forcing Congress to take action, I really don't think the White House, when it presented with a bill, would veto it. And it's very important to recognize that the statement at the White House yesterday was just that we don't support the House legislation. We prefer the Commerce Department to do it. It wasn't a veto threat. And I think what they're doing is trying to set up a deal that was kind of floated by Harry Reid to sort of trade the crude ban for renewable tax credits.
Let me jump in here and just ask. I mean, whenever you distort markets like this, it hurts the pricing mechanism. Is that happening because of this ban? I mean, for example, are refineries here getting cheaper oil because our own shale producers can't send it anywhere else?
Yeah, I mean, refiners are doing very well under the current arrangement. They're getting discounted crude, and they'll still do well with the crude ban lifted. But of course, the profit margins that they have now, of course, won't be able to continue. And of course, refiners can export gasoline. I don't think the American public realizes that we're exporting gasoline, but not crude.
Set this up for me. Why?
Okay, so you get the idea there. Once again, that is September 16th, 2015. Of course, they're referring to the previous president. And they had one set of variables in place, and then all of a sudden that changes now. We have the issue in Venezuela, U.S. orchestrated. We have this issue with Iran now, U.S. orchestrated. What does that mean? The Saudis can't keep up with this giant hole in oil supply. Now, I want you to think critically about this issue with U.S. energy independence. What does U.S. energy independence assume? It assumes the U.S. provides all of its own needs first. you would have to have some type of a legal mechanism in place to make sure that these independent oil companies do this. When that went away in 2014 and 2015, kiss energy independence goodbye. And it's bearing itself out in the facts. I've used this before and I'll use it again. This is crude oil exports, not production, by country. Okay, here it shows the United States down at number 13. This is 2017, but as of this year, not the biggest oil producer, which we also are, the biggest oil exporter. This means that we are continuing to import oil at the same rate, if not higher, because we are allowing big oil to take the lead. U.S. energy independence is no longer the goal. Their profit margin is the goal. And this is, of course, 2017, top 15 importers of oil. Most Americans, I would assume, would believe that as we discovered more oil, that we would be driving down the amount of oil we'd be importing. It's exactly the opposite now. With the issue in Venezuela and the issue in Iran, the U.S. consumer is now going to be hosed beyond belief. And the reason I brought up this wiki, and you can look this up if you don't like Wikipedia, it doesn't lie about everything. March 2015, 85% of crude oil imports came in this order. Canada number 1, Saudi Arabia number 2, Mexico number 3, Venezuela number 4, and Colombia number 5. Now with the issue in Venezuela, even with everything we've done to this day, we still import oil from Venezuela. We cannot stop importing oil from Venezuela because it would send gas prices through the roof. And they're already heading there. And mark my words, this is coming. There is no longer any impetus, any driving force for U.S. oil companies to bring the price of oil down. Because they can sell to whoever they want to. If things go to crap here, no problem. They'll sell to China. They'll sell to India. They'll sell to Europe. It doesn't matter. It used to matter, and that's what they were talking about in that last interview. Is that they had a reason to do things that maintained our economy in a healthy state by keeping oil prices, under wraps, keeping gasoline prices down. Because at some point, there's a tipping point. When it gets too expensive, it kills the economy. The money they're making doesn't make up for the amount of total revenue they're losing. You see the same thing with tax rates. But now, completely off the table. And I'm telling you, this is going to be the biggest untold story, unreported on story in the news. And if the guy in the White House is who you think or you thought he was, the first thing he would have done was reinstitute that ban. Because if he wanted to kill the Iran deal, he would have had to have known that the U.S., especially with the sanctions on Venezuela, how in the world could this guy who's supposed to be some business genius not see this coming? You mark my words. How could Mr. Administrator in the Oval Office think that we can sanction Venezuela, we can stop them from producing and putting oil on the market, and we can also do the same thing with Iran? And now he wants to point the finger at OPEC? How can that possibly be? They don't have the spare capacity. If there were any proof that this is who this guy really is, I think this would be it, and that's why you don't see it covered in the mainstream media. And once again, facts are facts. Here's where oil was, gas was in 2015, and here is where it is now. Less than 2, pushing 3. Since the ban was lifted. Even when they said it'd drive oil prices down, drive gas prices down, absolutely a lie. Total fiction. To get you to believe something that wasn't true under a set of circumstances that has now changed completely. And everything right here that you see is now happening. So we will leave it there. Like, share, subscribe.